All right then. So Jesus Christ, fully divine, also fully human. So second piece of that, of course, is the humanity of Jesus Christ. Before we dive into this, let me just point out that I think, generally speaking, Christians usually pretty fine with the idea of Jesus' deity. Atheists, of course, have all sorts of problems with that, but your average Christian doesn't have much of a problem with the deity of Jesus Christ. But I think we do have a problem with, or we're a little weirded out by, the humanity of Jesus. So many of the things about Jesus, we just want to like hand wave him away, saying, "Oh, he was God," right? So it's really important that we acknowledge that Jesus was fully human. That means fully human, like you and I. Whatever is essential to humanity, Jesus had that, right? So that's going to raise a bunch of questions that I think we're going to work through. Initially, the whole question of the humanity of Jesus raises at least two sort of just initial questions. The first really interesting one: did Jesus always know that he was God? Was he literally wrapped, in a manger, wrapped in swaddling cloths, right? Thinking, I'm the Almighty Creator of the universe, and I'm gonna be pooping in my diapers for 2 years, right? Was he on the day one on the planet? Did he also know that he was God, right? Now, this is an interesting question, because if you'd say he is, then that's a really, really interesting little kid. Imagine, 3-year-olds already think they're the center of the universe. What if this 3-year-old was actually the center of the universe, right? It's harder to imagine how Jesus has a normal childhood if he always knew he was God. Now, Scripture doesn't tell us much here on this, but I think an interesting thing that Scripture does say is that he grew in wisdom and stature. So the growing in stature is not a problem. Of course, Jesus got bigger. He wasn't always baby-sized, right? But what does it mean for God to grow in wisdom? So this suggests that Jesus had a more normal period of growth and growing up, perhaps, than we might think. And let me throw out a possibility. And again, we don't know too much about this, but I'm going to suggest that it's possible that Jesus did not always know he was God, right? Now, don't get me wrong. It's not that Jesus became God. He was always God. But he didn't realize that fact, or he started to realize that slowly. So maybe the scriptural account of Jesus running away from his parents, and he's at the temple, and he's sitting with the teachers. Maybe that's one of the moments where he starts to figure it out, right? And maybe he fully figures this out, when he's baptized, or maybe, who knows, right? So it's at least possible for us to see Jesus as having a more normal childhood and not to always know that he was God. The second question, just straightforward, is did Jesus sin, right? So we worry about, did Jesus, he was a teenage boy, right? Did he check out the good-looking girl down the street? Well, maybe. Here's the deal. Jesus was a normal human person, right? Except he did not sin. And Scripture is clear on this. He was tempted as we are, in all the ways that we are tempted, yet he was tempted, yet he was without sin, right? So Hebrews 4:15. Now, just as we did with the deity of Jesus Christ, let's talk about a little bit of the New Testament, how the New Testament treats the humanity of Jesus Christ. There are, again, a number of explicit texts. Texts come right out and talk about the humanity. Hebrews 2 talks about Jesus sharing in our humanity, not just for fun, not just for giggles, so that he can understand, right? That he really truly understands who we are, that he can save us because he shared in our humanity. We also see implicit texts, human aspects of Jesus' life. There's all sorts of things that Scripture talks about, that Jesus had a human origin. It talks a lot about his genealogy and obviously his birth, right? And then his growth, his limitations. He got hungry, he got tired, he got sleepy, and then his emotions. He got angry, he got frustrated. He had bad days, right? I think, if we want to just take Jesus and make him this like unfeeling, unemotional, person, he's just always happy and he's always, that's not what Scripture teaches. Scripture teaches that Jesus had bad days and got angry and got frustrated, right? Quite a bit, actually, if you read the Gospels and you really take seriously what it's talking about there. And then maybe the most powerful here is that Jesus was tempted. Now, take that, and CF means cross-reference, right? So connect that with James 1 says God cannot be tempted. So you say, how can Jesus be God? Well, he's not just God. He's also fully human, right? So Jesus can be tempted. And of course, the temptation narratives in Luke 4 and Matthew 4 talk about Satan tempting Jesus, right? So this is a powerful statement of his full and complete humanity. Now, there were a number of denials of Christ's humanity in the early church, right? So let's take a peek at just a couple of these. The first we've already seen, the Apollinarian heresy, right? Apollinarianism says that Jesus did not have a human mind. So imagine, maybe think of the earliest Jews. They're thinking about Jesus and they're saying, okay, well, obviously he has a physical body, yeah, because we see him, we're walking around with him. But when they start saying, well, he's God, they might have been tempted to see just physical body with God inside, right? So strip away anything human about Jesus' mind. But that was a view that was, again, explicitly refuted by the early church. The second view is called Docetism. Docetism is, the problem here is not his human mind, the problem is his human body. So Docetists, the word Docetism comes from the Greek word dokeo, to appear or seem. So the Docetists said, sure, Jesus looked like he had a human body, but it was just appearances. It just seemed to be that way. It wasn't actually that way. He did not actually have a human body, right? And think about why in the early, say, the first century Mediterranean world, why people might believe that. Yes, this is, of course, rooted in the Hellenistic view, the Greek understanding anything material, anything physical is bad, right? So imagine these are Greek converts. They've been told their entire life anything material is bad. They hear about this Jesus guy and they go, oh yeah, I like him. I'm going to follow him. But then go, well, but of course he didn't have a body, right? So Docetists were most often Greek converts who ended up rejecting the idea that Jesus had a material body. Now, this is pretty early. This happens, again, very early on in Christianity, because in 1 John 4, we have a clear denial of Docetism. So John, when he's writing 1 John 4, had obviously heard people out there, oh, Jesus didn't actually have a physical body, and he explicitly refutes it in 1 John 4. Now, let me close by engaging three important theological issues that are raised when we talk about the full humanity of Jesus Christ. The first is just, how do we wrap our head around this idea of the incarnation? And this starts becoming really relevant. We start wanting to talk about what attributes Jesus, the human, the incarnate Jesus has, right? Two different views of this. The first view is called two minds Christology. These two views, of course, are in Boydnetti as well, so you can go for more detail there. Two minds Christology says that Jesus had access to both divine and human attributes. And they do this by, the analogy I think that explains this best is lucid dreaming. So imagine you're having a lucid dream. You're dreaming and let's say in your dream, you're biking down a path or something like that, right? But then you wake up enough to realize you're dreaming. So there's the you that's still biking down the path that's in the dream, and there's the you that's awake that knows you're actually laying in your bed, right? So similarly, two minds Christology theorists, people hold the two minds view, says that the divine mind is like the waking mind. Divine mind has access to everything that he knows, and also knows everything that the human Jesus knows. The human Jesus is the Jesus in the dream, in the analogy, right? So in his humanity, Jesus isn't all powerful, right? But in his divinity, as you could say, his divine mind might know everything, even if the human mind doesn't, right? So this is a way of explaining how you can say, how can Jesus be fully divine, right? And have attributes that don't seem to be compatible with humanity. Second way of understanding this is what's called kenotic Christology. Kenosis, to me, the word kenosis, the Greek word kenosis, means to give up, right? So the idea is that Jesus gave up his divine attributes. And this comes from probably my favorite passage in the Bible, comes from Philippians 2. And it says, we can paraphrase, says, Jesus, not thinking equality with God was something to be grasped onto, hoarded. No, it's mine, right? I want to keep mine, right? Jesus, not thinking that equality with God was something to be grasped onto, he gave up his divine attributes, submitting himself to death, even death on a cross, right? So that Jesus gave up, willingly chose to give up his access to divine attributes and abilities for the purpose of becoming incarnate. Now, is he all powerful? He's choosing not to be for a time. So the interesting question, people who say, well, if he's all powerful, he cannot choose to do that. That's really interesting, isn't it? Think about it. If you're saying Jesus is all powerful, so he can't choose to give up access to his attributes, you're saying something an all-powerful being can't do, right? So it would seem to be that one of the things an all-powerful being could do, just to choose to, for the purposes of, for temporarily, for a time, to give up access to your abilities. And that's the argument. That's what Jesus, on this view, Jesus did. Second question, was Jesus fully human if he did not experience sin like us? Think about it. Every human that's ever lived has experienced sin. So how can Jesus be fully human if he never experiences sin, right? Now, I remember when I first heard this, I was like, ooh, that's a really, really strong objection. And then I thought about it for a little bit, and I realized that it's not. It looks like a really strong objection, but here's why it's not. Jesus was still fully human if he did not experience sin like us, because sin is not an essential property of humanity, right? So think of an essential property is something, if for you to be human means you have that. So is having a beard an essential property of humanity? Of course not, right? My wife wouldn't like it to not even be any sort of property of me, but here it is. Is having a soul an essential property of humanity? Yes, for you to be a human means you have to have a soul. So having two hands, having a beard, being 52 years old, none of those are essential properties of being fully human. Having a soul certainly would be, right? So here's the deal: being sinful is not an essential property of being a human, right? It's possible to be human and to be not sinful. And the great example of that is Adam and Eve before they sinned. Before Adam and Eve sinned, were they fully human? Of course they were. So, of course, Jesus can still be fully human because sin is not something that is, just the default for us. Sin makes us less than we should have been, right? Sin is, you could call it a subhuman property. It messes us up. It's not the normal, it's subnormal. Final question, and this is a doozy. Could Jesus have sinned? Right? So granted, Scripture says he didn't. Could he have? Did he have the ability to do so? And this is a question that raises the issue of human freedom. And what sort of freedom did Jesus have? And because it's that, it raises the Calvinist-Arminian debate. So notice, this is not going to be a problem for Calvinists. Many people have just that super strong instinct. Jesus could not have sinned. He didn't have the ability to do it, right? That works great if you're a Calvinist and you have a view of human freedom that you remember is called compatibilist. And that is that God ordains what's going to happen, and you have the freedom to just agree with that. So on this view, God ordained Jesus would not sin, and so he has the sort of freedom that just agrees with what God has ordained. So this is not a problem because human beings have compatible freedom. So does Jesus, right? God ordained Jesus wouldn't sin. He didn't sin. Easy. Could not have sinned. This is a problem for Arminians. And the reason why it's a problem for Arminians is that because Arminians argue that human beings have libertarian freedom, it seems that Jesus did too, right? It seems really, really weird if Jesus would have a different understanding or different type of freedom than humans would have, that the rest of humans would have, right? So if human beings have libertarian freedom, as Arminians claim, Jesus has to have libertarian freedom as well, but libertarian freedom requires power to the contrary, right? So we got to remember power to the contrary. I choose to wear the green shirt, but I could have chosen to wear the black shirt or the blue shirt or whatever else, right? So libertarian freedom, Jesus does choose to remain sinless, but that entails that he could have chosen, other than that, he could have chosen to sin, right? So libertarian freedom seems to require power to the contrary. So how do we think about this from an Arminian perspective? And the question I would ask is it heresy to say that Jesus could have sinned? I don't think it is. It's heresy to say he did sin. It's not heresy to say that he could have sinned. So the answer, no, it's not heresy, because could have does not entail would have. There's all sorts of things that I could have done, but that I never would do. So instead of recording this lecture, I could have taken my laptop and, punted it out into the middle of the street, right? I could have, run it through a chipper shredder, all these things I could have done. They're within my power to do, but I just never would have done them, right? So just to merely say Jesus could have sinned does not mean that he would have, right? And here's the other deal, and this is, I think, important. Jesus says that Jesus was tempted as we are. And for Jesus to be tempted as we are, as it says in Hebrews 4:15, I think he has to have the same kind of freedom that we have, right? So as an Arminian, I think that's the best way to deal with this pretty interesting, difficult question. So there you go, humanity of Jesus. Next lecture, talking about the atonement, what he does to make possible our salvation.